Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. The photograph seems innocent at first glance. A carefully arranged tea party in a well-appointed Edwardian drawing room, dated 1908. Three women in high-necked lace blouses and flowing skirts sit around a small table draped with fine linen. Their posture is impeccable, spines straight as the silver teaspoons balanced delicately against porcelain saucers. Their expressions betray nothing beyond the polite societal masks of the era, perhaps a hint of boredom in the eyes of the youngest, whose hair is swept up in an elaborate pompadour popular during Edward VII's reign. The drawing room speaks of modest wealth, not aristocratic opulence, but comfortable upper-middle-class prosperity. Heavy velvet curtains frame tall windows. Wallpaper with intricate floral patterns climbs the walls. A piano stands in the corner, sheet music open but unattended. The late afternoon light creates a sepia-toned haze across the scene, lending everything a nostalgic warmth. Yet something disrupts this idyllic moment frozen in time. There, on the sideboard behind them, partially hidden by a vase of wilting roses but unmistakable to the careful observer, a small, dark bottle. Its shape is distinctive, with the narrow neck and small glass stopper typical of compounds that required careful handling. More telling is the barely visible label with the crossed bone symbol, the universal warning for poison. What makes this detail particularly unsettling is that none of the women acknowledge it. It sits in plain view, yet they continue their social performance as though nothing is amiss. One woman raises a teacup to her lips, her wedding ring catching the light. Another appears to be mid-sentence, hand gracefully suspended in conversation. The third, the youngest, looks directly at the camera with an expression that, upon closer inspection, might not be boredom after all. The photographer must have seen it. The bottle is positioned just at the edge of the frame, but clearly within it. Was it placed there deliberately as some kind of message? Or was it so commonplace in this household that no one thought to remove it from the composition? In 1908, such bottles were not uncommon in respectable homes. Arsenic, strychnine, belladonna, all had their domestic and medicinal uses despite their deadly potential. But their presence was typically hidden away in cabinets and drawers, not displayed during afternoon tea. More curious still is what happened after this photograph was taken. Records indicate that within 3 months of this image, one woman in this room would be dead, another would inherit a substantial sum, and the third would never be mentioned in family records again. The photograph raises uncomfortable questions. Was the poison bottle an accidental inclusion or a deliberate one? Was it a warning ignored or a threat displayed? And most importantly, which of these women, sipping tea with such apparent tranquility, had already calculated the precise amount needed to ensure a death that would appear natural? The practice of poisoning in the Edwardian period was both reviled and remarkably prevalent. Newspapers of 1908 frequently reported mysterious deaths attributed to heart failure or gastric disorders, only for exhumations months later to reveal toxic compounds lurking in preserved tissues. Poison was considered a woman's weapon, subtle, domestic, requiring neither physical strength nor confrontation. The bottle in our photograph appears to be laudanum, tincture of opium, judging by its characteristic amber-brown glass designed to protect the contents from light degradation. While ostensibly medicinal, used for everything from insomnia to feminine complaints, its potential for deliberate misuse made it the perfect method for what contemporary police reports delicately termed removing inconvenient persons. Records from the Bromley Hospital archive identify our 3 subjects as sisters, Lillian, Margaret, and Constance Harwick, daughters of industrialist Edwin Harwick, whose modest fortune in textile manufacturing had provided them with a comfortable, if not lavish, upbringing. Their mother Caroline had passed 5 years prior to this photograph, leaving the sisters to maintain the family's social obligations. Lillian, the eldest at 31, had married Frederick Palmer, an accountant whose ambitions exceeded his talents. Margaret, 28, remained unmarried, unusual enough to warrant gossip among their circle. Constance, just 23 and looking directly at the camera, had recently returned from finishing school in Switzerland. The coroner's report, dated November 12, 1908, states that Margaret Harwick died from natural causes following a prolonged illness. No autopsy was performed, a common oversight when respectable families insisted their loved one had been unwell for some time. Her personal physician signed the death certificate without question. After all, Spinsters were known to succumb to melancholia and subsequent physical decline. What makes this case particularly intriguing is the amendment to Edwin Harwick's will discovered among solicitors' papers. Dated just 2 weeks before this photograph was taken, it redistributed the expected inheritance should any daughter predecease the others. Originally, the sisters would share equally. The amendment ensured that should one die, her portion would not be divided between remaining siblings but instead go entirely to Constance, the youngest. A household receipt book, preserved alongside this photograph in the county archives, shows purchases from Burroughs and Wellcome, a pharmaceutical company known for their standardized medicines. 3 entries for sleeping preparations appear in the months leading up to Margaret's death, each in increasingly higher quantities. Perhaps most telling is the letter from Frederick Palmer to his brother, penned the week after Margaret's funeral. Financial pressures have eased considerably. Lillian's position has improved through her sister's unfortunate passing, and consequently, so has mine. The younger sister appears content with her additional inheritance, though she spends an inordinate amount of time at the piano these days, playing the same melancholy Chopin piece repeatedly. The teacups in this photograph, Wedgwood bone china with a delicate primrose pattern, were sold at auction 6 months later when the Harwick house was unexpectedly vacated. According to newspaper accounts, Constance departed for the continent abruptly, while Lillian and Frederick relocated to Bath, where they established themselves in a substantially grander home than their previous means should have allowed. The photograph found its way to my desk through an unusual channel. A dealer in antiquarian curios contacted me after purchasing the contents of a small safety deposit box in Zurich that had remained unclaimed for over 70 years. Among various documents was this image and a leather-bound journal with a curious inscription. What the camera sees, time reveals. The journal belonged to the photographer himself, one Thomas Hewitt, who operated a modest but respected portrait studio in Kensington. Hewitt was known for his technical precision and discretion among clients who preferred their family matters remain private. His journal entries from 1908 reveal a man increasingly troubled by what transpired in the viewfinder of his Thornton Pickard camera. "Today I photographed the Harwick sisters at their residence," he wrote on April 3rd. "The eldest commissioned 3 formal prints, though seemed distracted throughout. The youngest positioned herself deliberately, adjusting the scene before I arrived. Something in her manner unsettled me, a calculation behind her eyes as she insisted on including the sideboard in frame. When developing the plates, I noticed the bottle. Too late to refuse delivery of the prints, though my conscience weighs heavily." 2 weeks later, another entry. "Miss C. Harwick visited my studio unannounced, requesting additional copies of the Tea Party portrait. She examined the print with unusual attention to detail, asking if I had noticed anything peculiar in the background. I feigned ignorance. She smiled in a manner that chilled me, then commissioned a special locket-sized version to be delivered directly to her sister Margaret. The Metropolitan Police Archives yielded additional context through records of an interview conducted with the Harwick's parlor-maid, Elizabeth Winters, though no formal investigation followed. Winters reported that Miss Constance had developed an intense interest in the family's medical cabinet following her return from Switzerland, where she had befriended a chemistry student from Vienna. She mentioned finding bottles rearranged and labels partially scraped away. Most significantly, she recalled Miss Margaret complaining of a peculiar bitter taste in her evening tea during the weeks before her death. The financial ledgers of Frederick Palmer tell their own damning story. His accounting firm was on the brink of disgrace following several unwise investments in speculative mining ventures. 3 substantial withdrawals from Lillian's personal accounts had failed to cover mounting debts. The day after Margaret's funeral, however, he deposited a sum sufficient to satisfy all creditors and secure his partnership in the firm. An overlooked detail in the photograph provides another disturbing layer: the sheet music visible on the piano. Though partially obscured, musical historians identify it as Chopin's Funeral March, an odd selection for afternoon tea unless intended as some macabre foreshadowing. Most revealing is the telegram sent from Constance to Frederick 2 days after the photograph was taken. Arrangements proceeding as discussed. L remains unaware. Destroy this communication. This message was preserved only because Frederick, perhaps protecting himself, tucked it between pages of his business ledger rather than destroying it as instructed. The poison bottle's deliberate inclusion in this family portrait was no accident but a visual signature, a killer's pride captured in silver halide, preserved for posterity. Not a warning, but a trophy hidden in plain sight. acknowledging a conspiracy between the youngest and eldest sister's husband against the middle sibling, whose only crime may have been standing between them and financial salvation. 2 years after the photograph was taken, Constance Harwick reappeared in London society. No longer the youngest sister with a calculating gaze, she had transformed herself into the Countess von Reichenbach, following a hasty marriage to an obscure Austrian nobleman. Her return caused quite a stir, particularly as she now possessed both the confidence and resources to establish herself among circles previously closed to the Harwick family. What fascinated me most about her re-emergence was the distinctive brooch she wore in every public appearance, a silver oval containing what appeared to be a miniature version of our Tea Party photograph, the image reduced but unmistakable, a peculiar memento to display so prominently considering the circumstances. The Countess took residence in Belgrave Square, hosting elaborate soirees that drew curious members of society eager to witness her transformation. Among her regular guests was Frederick Palmer, now a widower. Lillian had passed away 6 months earlier from what her physician described as a wasting illness of unknown origin. The timing aligned precisely with Frederick's appointment as financial advisor to the Countess's considerable estate. Newspaper accounts from the Westminster Gazette described the Countess's drawing room as featuring an unusual display cabinet containing antique medicinal bottles, which she discussed with evident expertise. One society columnist noted her particular animation when explaining the properties of certain compounds to mesmerized guests. Thomas Hewitt, the photographer, attended one such gathering, not as a guest but hired to document the evening. His journal entry from that night reads, "She recognized me instantly, though pretended otherwise. When guests had departed, she requested a private portrait. During the sitting, she spoke of chemical processes in photography with disturbing parallels to those in physiology. She knows I understand the significance of that bottle." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. The most disturbing evidence came from Dr. James Creswell, who treated both Harwick sisters in their final days. In a confidential letter to a medical colleague, he confessed his growing suspicion that the identical symptoms presented by both Margaret and Lillian, gradual paralysis, increased sensitivity to light, and progressive respiratory failure, indicated thallium poisoning rather than natural illness. Yet he had certified both deaths without further inquiry, a decision he attributed to considerable financial pressure and veiled intimidations. A visitor's book from the Belgrave Square residence reveals that Elizabeth Winters, the former Harwick parlor maid, called upon the Countess in December 1910. She departed London the following day, boarding a steamer bound for New York with a first-class ticket and £50 sterling, an extraordinary sum for a domestic servant. The final piece of this macabre puzzle emerged when Frederick Palmer died suddenly in 1912 during a private dinner with the Countess. The coroner ruled apoplexy, but Hewitt's journal records a different account. The photographer had been positioned in an adjacent room to capture candid images of the Countess's gathering. Through his lens, he observed her remove something from a locket, the same that contained the Tea Party photograph, and sprinkle it into Palmer's wine glass while he examined a document. The poisonous legacy of that 1908 Tea Party extended far beyond a single death. The bottle in the photograph wasn't merely evidence of a murder planned. It was the beginning of a methodical elimination orchestrated by a woman who understood that patience, performance, and poison were the perfect ingredients for reinvention. The Countess von Reichenbach's trail grew increasingly difficult to follow after Frederick Palmer's death. Society pages mentioned her departure for Vienna in early 1913, but archival records suggest she never arrived at her family estate. Instead, shipping manifests reveal a woman matching her description boarded the RMS Oceanic bound for New York under the name Charlotte Reynolds, traveling with a substantial 12 trunks and a locked case described as photographic equipment. I found myself drawn to this shadow that slipped between identities, wondering if America had provided fertile ground for her particular talents. The answer came from an unexpected source, a collection of medical journals donated to the Boston University archives by the estate of Dr. Evelyn Morris, one of the first female toxicologists in Massachusetts. Dr. Morris had maintained a curious personal research project alongside her official work, documenting suspected poisonings among Boston's elite between 1914 and 1921. Her notes described 6 cases where wealthy individuals died after short, puzzling illnesses. Each victim had recently welcomed into their circle a captivating widow named Charlotte Reynolds, who claimed distant European aristocratic connections. Most revealing was Dr. Morris's observation that Mrs. Reynolds wore an unusual silver locket containing what appeared to be a family photograph. In one margin note, the doctor wrote, "Patient H described seeing inside the locket before falling ill, 3 women at tea, 1 looking directly at camera. Mrs. R explained it represented those who helped me become who I am today. Patient expired before further details could be obtained." The Boston Police Department files contained another crucial piece, a detective's report noting that Charlotte Reynolds vanished completely after the death of shipping magnate William Cavendish in 1921. His considerable fortune was transferred to banks in Switzerland 3 days before his body was discovered. The detective had written, "Suspect displays unprecedented sophistication. Poison undetectable by current methods. Believe previous deaths connected. Subject travels with collection of antique medicine bottles she claims are family heirlooms." Most chilling was the final piece of evidence I uncovered in the photographer Thomas Hewitt's effects. Among his last possessions was an envelope marked "Insurance," containing a glass plate negative of another photograph taken the same day as the tea party, clearly moments after the formal portrait. In this image, Constance stands alone by the sideboard, the poison bottle now in her gloved hand. She looks directly at the camera with an expression of calm certainty as she raises one finger to her lips in the universal gesture for silence. Hewitt never published this damning evidence, but kept it protected, perhaps understanding it might someday be needed. On the envelope's reverse, he had written, "She believes the camera captures only what we choose to show. She is wrong. Light reveals all truths eventually." The final confirmed sighting of the woman who began as Constance Harwick comes from the passenger manifest of the SS Ile-de-France departing New York in 1928. A first-class passenger named Eleanor Blackwell, traveling alone with 14 pieces of luggage, bears a striking resemblance to our subject in the ship's security photographs. Her stated destination was Monte Carlo, but no record exists of her arrival. The poison bottle from our original photograph had traveled far from that Edwardian drawing room, carried in the hands of a woman who had perfected its use. Like the image itself, she had developed in darkness, fixed her intentions, and disappeared into history, leaving behind only fragments for those who know where to look. The trail of Constance Harwick, the Countess, Charlotte Reynolds, Eleanor Blackwell, might have ended with that Atlantic crossing in 1928, but shadows cast by such methodical malevolence rarely disappear completely. While investigating auction records for estates liquidated during the early Depression years, I discovered a private collection sold in Paris, 1931. Among the items, an antique medicinal cabinet with original bottles, formerly property of European nobility. The buyer, a Dr. Simone Laurent, paid an extraordinary sum specifically for this piece. Dr. Laurent proves fascinating herself, a French physician who specialized in forensic toxicology at a time when women in such fields remained exceptional. Her research papers from the mid-1930s show a singular focus on historical poisoning cases and modern detection methods. More telling was her collection of photographic portraiture featuring female poisoners throughout history, including several cabinet cards she annotated extensively, searching for physiological commonalities among these killers. The most startling connection emerged through census records from the French Riviera. A villa in Menton, purchased in 1932, was registered to Dr. Laurent, but frequently hosted a widowed American relation named Mrs. Eleanor Westfield. Photographs from regional society pages show both women attending cultural events, though Mrs. Westfield always wore veils or appeared partially turned from the camera. Their relationship ended abruptly in 1939 with Dr. Laurent's unexplained disappearance just as German forces advanced toward France. Local police reports indicate she had been researching a particular case with increasing urgency in the weeks before she vanished. Her notebooks, later recovered, contained repeated references to the woman in the photograph and patterns across continents. Most revealing was a letter found in Dr. Laurent's desk, never sent, addressed simply to C. The contents suggest not just professional interest, but personal connection. I recognized you immediately in Boston, though you did not remember me, the young chemistry student from Vienna who so admired your questions about undetectable compounds. I have tracked your progressive expertise across 3 continents. The photographer's second image has answered many questions, though not why you spared me that evening in your drawing room when I delivered your particular tea blend. Perhaps because I provided useful knowledge? My silence then enabled your transformation, but science has now caught up with your methods. This cannot continue. The letter ended mid-sentence, as if Dr. Laurent had been interrupted while writing it. Mrs. Westfield disappeared from Menton 3 days after Dr. Laurent vanished. Her villa staff reported nothing unusual except her request to burn certain papers and photographs before her departure. She left behind a single item, a silver locket containing not the Tea Party photograph, but a portrait of Dr. Laurent as a young student. This connection between victim and predator suggests an intricate relationship far beyond coincidence. Had Dr. Laurent been studying the woman who had once been Constance Harwick, not merely as a scientific subject, but as a former mentor? Had she been gathering evidence for exposure or blackmail? Or had she become the final adversary in a deadly game spanning decades? The answer may lie in a Swiss sanatorium's records from 1947, where an elderly English patient admitted with advanced thallium poisoning described her condition as poetic justice to attending physicians. She died before providing her real name, leaving behind only a small camera containing undeveloped film. The undeveloped film from the sanatorium remained in archival limbo until 2015, when renovations to the facility uncovered a sealed metal box in a wall cavity. Inside, preserved from light and degradation, lay not only the camera, but a journal bound in red leather. The Swiss Federal Archives contacted me after connecting these items to my previous inquiries into the Harwick case. The photographs, carefully developed using period-appropriate techniques, revealed something extraordinary: a methodical documentation of poison bottles dating from the 18th century through the 1940s. Each image featured the bottle photographed alongside handwritten notes detailing its contents, effects, and most disturbingly, the names of those who had succumbed to each formulation. The final image on the roll showed an elderly woman's hand holding the original amber laudanum bottle from our 1908 Tea Party photograph. The accompanying note read, "First and last, the circle closes." The journal proved even more revealing. A meticulous record kept by Dr. Laurent documenting her decades-long pursuit of the woman she called the Collector. Entries described how Laurent had first encountered Constance as a chemistry student, becoming unwittingly fascinated by the Englishwoman's precise questions about untraceable compounds. Years later in Boston, Laurent recognized her former mentor operating under a new identity. "She collects not just the vessels that contained death," Laurent wrote, "but the transformations each death afforded her, each new identity built upon the elimination of those who knew her previous self." The photograph she keeps always with her is not a memento, but a blueprint, her first masterpiece that taught her how simple it is to remain in plain sight while orchestrating disappearances. Most chilling was Laurent's final entry, dated 3 days before her reported disappearance from Menton. "I have confronted C with everything I know." Rather than denial, she offered instruction, a final tutorial in her methodologies. She speaks of her work almost as art, creating vacancies into which she can expand. She has invited me to her villa tomorrow to see her complete collection. I understand this is likely a trap, yet I cannot resist the opportunity to document her gallery of poisons. I have taken precautions, including preparations that will ensure my observations survive even if I do not. The Swiss physician who treated the dying Englishwoman included notes suggesting his patient had been self-administering small doses of thallium for years, building tolerance while maintaining its presence in her system. This practice, known as mithridatism, ultimately failed her when age weakened her resistance. Among her personal effects was a newspaper clipping about an exhibition at the British Museum featuring Victorian photography. The article included a reproduction of our Tea Party photograph, displayed as an example of Edwardian domestic portraiture. Someone had circled it and written in a shaking hand, "They still don't see it." Perhaps most disturbing was the final item in the metal box, a visitor's ledger from the sanatorium showing that in the weeks before the Englishwoman's death, she received regular visits from a young female medical student who signed only with the initial C. The poisoner's legacy, it seems, was not merely the lives she took, but the knowledge she selectively passed down, ensuring her methodologies would survive even as her physical presence faded from the world. The photograph from the sanatorium led me to the British Museum's archives, where I discovered that our Tea Party image had been donated anonymously in 2003. The curator's notes mentioned unusual preservation methods and a peculiar scent of bitter almonds emanating from the frame when first opened. More intriguing was what lay behind the photograph. A thin cavity in the wooden backing contained a folded sheet of tissue paper with a recipe written in faded purple ink. Forensic analysis confirmed it was a formula for a thallium compound designed to mimic symptoms of various natural illnesses depending on dosage. The handwriting matched marginalia in books once owned by Constance Harwick. While researching contemporary connections, I received an unexpected email from a graduate student in toxicology at Imperial College London. She had been following my published articles on the case and revealed that her great-grandmother had been a housemaid for a distinguished widow in Belgravia during the 1930s. Among her inherited effects was a small leather-bound notebook containing household recipes, mostly for polishes, tinctures, and cleaning solutions, but with a section of medicinal formulations that modern analysis proved lethal. My research supervisor became concerned when I brought these recipes to his attention, she wrote. Several are sophisticated compounds that have appeared in poisoning cases across Europe, but were never published in scientific literature. He believes they represent a kind of dark oral tradition passed between practitioners. The student, Catherine Laurent Weiss, attached a photograph of herself standing beside a glass display case containing antique pharmaceutical bottles. Her resemblance to both Constance Harwick and Simone Laurent was subtle but unmistakable in the bone structure and the watchful intensity of her gaze. "I've been collecting these bottles since childhood," she explained, drawn to them without understanding why. "My grandmother always said they represented family history. I never realized how literally she meant it until I began studying their residues." Most unnerving was her closing paragraph. "I believe the woman you've been tracking trained generations of successors, selecting candidates based on aptitude rather than bloodline. The knowledge transferred was never just about compounds, but about reinvention, the chemistry of identity transformation. I've found photographs of different women from different eras all wearing the same silver locket. What if part of her methodology included ensuring her own obsolescence, while her knowledge lived on through carefully selected inheritors?" Her email signature included a quote from Paracelsus: "All things are poison, and nothing is without poison. The dosage alone makes it so a thing is not a poison." I arranged to meet Catherine at the museum the following week to examine her collection. She never arrived. The university reported she had taken unexpected leave for family reasons. Her flat stood empty, laboratory samples neatly catalogued and stored. The only trace of her passage was a small package delivered to my office containing a silver locket. Inside was not the expected tea party photograph, but a miniature portrait of myself seated at my desk, examining the original image. On the reverse was engraved a simple message: "Looking is not seeing." The search for Constance Harwick has evolved into something more disturbing: the pursuit of an idea transmitted through time, a methodology that requires no single practitioner because it replicates itself through carefully selected vessels across generations. The poison bottle in that 1908 photograph wasn't merely evidence of a crime, but the first visible manifestation of a tradition still very much alive. The connection to Catherine Laurent Weiss lingered like a toxin in my system, gradually intensifying rather than dissipating. Her disappearance created a vacuum that seemed intentional, a negative space designed to draw me deeper into the patterns established over a century ago. I found myself examining ordinary interactions with newfound suspicion, wondering if casual conversations with baristas, librarians, or taxi drivers might contain calculated subtexts. 3 nights ago, I discovered my apartment had been entered. Nothing was visibly disturbed or stolen, yet subtle rearrangements suggested someone had methodically examined my research. The teacup on my desk had been moved precisely 2 inches. My files, though returned to their folders, showed signs of careful inspection. Most disturbingly, my pillowcase carried the faintest trace of a scent I recognized from the British Museum archives: bitter almonds. This violation prompted me to digitize all my research and store physical materials in a secure location. While scanning documents late into the evening, I discovered something overlooked: the reflection in the piano's polished surface captured in the original photograph. When digitally enhanced and reversed, it revealed a 4th person present in the drawing room, standing behind the camera. A woman whose partial reflection showed hands positioned as if making adjustments, not to the camera, but to something on the tea tray. The university's photography department helped reconstruct this figure using computational analysis. The resulting image showed a young woman in servant's attire, almost certainly Elizabeth Winters, the parlor maid who later received passage to America. Her expression, captured in the piano's reflection, held none of the deference expected from household staff. but rather displayed the focused intensity of someone conducting a demonstration. Yesterday, a package arrived from Switzerland containing personal effects from the sanatorium's archived storage. Among them, a leather address book belonging to the elderly Englishwoman. Most entries were crossed out, presumably as their owners died, but one remained unmarked. An address in Chelsea that property records showed had been continuously owned by a succession of women since 1928, each transferring ownership to another shortly before their reported deaths or disappearances. Most unsettling was this morning's mail, a modern postcard showing the Museum of Science and Industry's pharmaceutical exhibition. The handwritten message read simply, "Knowledge never dies, it merely changes hands." The bottle that began this journey awaits your inspection. The postmark came from my own postal district. I find myself at a crossroads of scholarly integrity and self-preservation. The responsible course would be to forward all evidence to authorities. Yet the network I've uncovered has demonstrated remarkable resilience across centuries, suggesting institutional penetration that would render official channels not merely ineffective, but potentially dangerous. More compelling is the growing certainty that I'm being assessed rather than threatened, evaluated for some quality that connects Catherine Laurent Weiss to Simone Laurent to Constance Harwick. The poison bottle from the Tea Party photograph has transformed from evidence into invitation, and the longer I pursue it, the more I suspect I am not hunting this legacy, but being drawn into its carefully preserved tradition. The transformative power of poison rests in its paradoxical nature. The same substance that heals in minute quantities destroys when the balance shifts. This duality wasn't lost on Victorian and Edwardian women who found themselves trapped within suffocating social structures with few legitimate avenues for self-determination. I've spent the past week examining period pharmaceutical texts at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society archives. What modern readers might find shocking is how casually deadly compounds were discussed in household management books from 1908. Volumes like The Lady's Complete Guide to Domestic Management contained instructions for preparing arsenic-based complexion waters alongside recipes for breakfast muffins. Belladonna eye drops were recommended to achieve the fashionable dilated pupil look, while strychnine tonics promised renewed vigor for the chronically fatigued. More revealing were the marginalia in these texts, subtle annotations in different hands across generations, refining doses, noting observed effects, perfecting the art of chemical manipulation. One particularly well-worn volume from 1879 contained a folded note slipped between pages on remedies for difficult husbands that simply stated, "Begin with 1/4 the dose on Sunday, increase by drops until Thursday. Symptoms should present as gastric inflammation. Maintain normal household routines throughout." The pattern I've discerned suggests not a single poisoner working across decades, but a carefully maintained knowledge tradition, a sisterhood of sorts, passing techniques through generations. The poison bottle in our photograph wasn't merely Constance Harwick's tool, but a symbol of initiation, deliberately placed to mark the continuation of this lineage. Elizabeth Winter's role appears increasingly central. Census records show she wasn't merely a parlor maid, but had trained as a chemist's assistant before entering domestic service. Unusual qualifications for household staff. Her elevated passage to America came just as pharmaceutical regulations tightened in Britain following several high-profile poisoning cases. The timing suggests not escape, but strategic redeployment to more fertile ground. Most disturbing is what I discovered yesterday at the Chelsea address. The current occupant, a silver-haired woman who introduced herself as Professor Emily Westbrook, invited me in without surprise, as though she'd been expecting me. Her drawing room contained a glass cabinet displaying antique pharmaceutical bottles, arranged chronologically, the oldest dating to the 1700s. The collection's centerpiece stood empty, a bottle-shaped absence precisely matching the dimensions of the one from our 1908 photograph. "The original stays elsewhere for safekeeping," she explained unprompted, "but its purpose remains active." When I asked what she meant, she smiled with practiced warmth that failed to reach her eyes. "Some bottles contain poison, Dr. Foster. Others contain knowledge. The most dangerous contain both. The question isn't what's in the bottle, but whether you're prepared to understand its contents." She served tea in Wedgwood cups with a primrose pattern identical to those in our photograph. I declined to drink. I'm examining the Chelsea house more carefully now, noting how each room contains strategic references to the Harwick sisters' original drawing room. It's as if the space has been designed as an elaborate echo, the wallpaper pattern similar though not identical. Furniture positioned to mirror the 1908 arrangement, even a piano in the exact angle shown in the photograph. Professor Westbrook watches my observation with clinical interest. You notice patterns quickly. That's promising. The way she evaluates me feels familiar. The same calculating assessment evident in Constance Harwick's gaze from that Tea Party portrait. I wonder how many others have stood where I stand now, being measured against some unspoken standard. The bottle represents something beyond its physical contents, doesn't it? I ask, trying to maintain scholarly detachment despite my racing pulse. A methodology passed between women when other forms of power were denied them. She nods approvingly. Men control through force or legislation. We discovered more elegant solutions. She gestures to a leather-bound album on the side table. Perhaps you'd care to see the complete collection? The album contains photographs spanning over a century, formal portraits of women from different eras, diverse in appearance but connected by a distinctive intensity in their expressions. Each portrait includes, somewhere in frame, a small bottle or vial, some prominently displayed, others nearly hidden, a visual signature repeated across generations. Constance wasn't the first, Westbrook explains, turning pages with gloved hands, merely the one who formalized our approach. The photograph you've been studying was deliberately preserved, a teaching tool demonstrating perfect composition. Composition of the image or the poison? I ask. Both require similar precision, she replies. The correct elements, proper timing, careful development. Few have the temperament for such work. The final pages show more recent subjects. I freeze when I recognize Catherine Laurent Weiss among them, looking directly at the camera with the same knowing expression as her predecessors. Where is she now? I manage to ask. Continuing her studies. Your work drew her attention. She recognized a kindred analytical mind. We've been watching your investigation with interest. She closes the album and retrieves a small package from her desk drawer. This belongs with your research materials. A primary source, you might say. Inside lies a small diary, its cover worn and pages yellowed with age. The inscription reads, Margaret Harwick, Private Thoughts, 1908. The voice missing from your narrative, Westbrook explains. Margaret understood her role in the transformation about to occur. It wasn't simply murder, it was transference. Some vessels must be emptied so others may be filled. As I accept this disturbing artifact, I notice a distinctive silver ring on Professor Westbrook's right hand, identical to the one worn by Margaret in the Tea Party photograph. You've been looking for poisoners, she says softly, but what we maintain is something far more essential. A lineage of women who understand transformation requires sacrifice. The bottle isn't merely a tool, but a chalice. I leave with the diary clutched tightly, aware that in accepting it, I've altered my relationship to this investigation. No longer simply documenting history, I've been drawn into its continuation, assessed, tested, and perhaps selected for some role I don't yet fully comprehend. Margaret Harwick's diary presents an unexpected perspective. Her demise was not merely a passive victimhood, but something approaching complicity. The cramped, methodical handwriting becomes increasingly erratic in the final entries, yet maintains a disturbing lucidity. I understand what Constance requires of me. She wrote 3 days before the Tea Party photograph was taken. My body weakens while her purpose strengthens. We each serve the knowledge in our own way, mine by creating the vacancy she will fill, hers by carrying forward what must not be lost. The lineage cannot sustain 3 vessels in one household. Lillian suspects nothing of our arrangement. Most unsettling is Margaret's detailed documentation of her own symptoms, not with fear but scientific precision. She records pulse rates, pupil dilation, numbness patterns in her extremities. Her clinical self-observation reads like field notes from the edge of existence. Today I noticed the light around objects appears haloed, she wrote the day after the photograph. My hearing has sharpened remarkably. I can detect conversations through walls now. Constance says this heightened perception is common near the threshold. The transition begins. The diary suggests a belief system rather than mere methodology, a conviction that certain knowledge must continue through carefully selected vessels, with each transition requiring a sacrifice. Margaret's writings reference the succession repeatedly, describing it as our unbroken chain since Agrippina taught what crushing peach kernels could accomplish. Professor Westbrook has begun calling with increasing frequency, inquiring about my progress with the diary. Her questions probe my reactions rather than the content itself. measuring my capacity for understanding this disturbing tradition. Margaret's contribution is often overlooked, she remarked during yesterday's conversation. People fixate on Constance as the actor, but both roles require extraordinary commitment. Without the vessel that empties, there cannot be one that fills. I've discovered something Professor Westbrook doesn't know I possess. A photograph that fell from between the diary's pages. It shows 5 women arranged in a formal group portrait, dated 1872. Their names are listed on the reverse. Adelaide Harwick, Constance's grandmother, alongside 4 others identified only by initials. Each woman wears a distinctive silver ring identical to Margaret's and Westbrook's. The inscription below their names reads, "The succession maintains what medicine fears and law forbids, knowledge preserved through transformation." More disturbing still is the realization that the Chelsea house I visited stands at precisely the same location as the original Harwick home, though the building itself has been replaced. The drawing room where I accepted tea sits above the exact spot where Margaret Harwick took her final breaths. The diary's final entry, written hours before her death, contains a passage that haunts me. "I taste metal constantly now. Constance says this means the knowledge begins its transfer. She will receive what I can no longer contain. The bottle that delivered me from one state to another will remain as testament. Future observers must decide whether to fear its contents or recognize their potential. The photograph will find those ready to understand. The silver ring has become an object of uncomfortable fascination for me. I find myself sketching its design from memory, a serpentine band that coils twice around the finger, culminating in a small bezel containing what appears to be crushed mother of pearl. Professor Westbrook wears it on her right index finger, exactly as Margaret did in the photograph. I've consulted with a jewelry historian at the Victoria and Albert Museum, who identified its distinctive style as Roman Revival, popular in the 1860s. What makes this particular design unusual is the internal channel running through the hollow band, a feature traditionally associated with poison rings that could hold a small amount of powder. These weren't necessarily sinister, the curator explained, examining my detailed sketch. Many contained perfumes or medicinal compounds for personal use. Though this channel appears unusually sophisticated, note how the bezel acts as both seal and delivery mechanism. When I mentioned the inscription about Agrippina from Margaret's diary, her expression changed. Interesting reference. Agrippina the Younger was rumored to have poisoned Emperor Claudius with mushrooms. She was considered exceptionally knowledgeable about botanical compounds in an era when such expertise represented considerable power. The connection between these rings and the succession Margaret described suggests something beyond mere symbolism, a functional tool passed between initiates. If each woman wore such a ring, they carried not just the emblem of their association, but potentially the means of transformation itself. I've begun researching the other names from the 1872 photograph. Adelaide Harwick, Constance's grandmother, appears in medical records as a midwife with unusual success rates treating women with nervous disorders in an era when such diagnoses often masked genuine medical conditions. 2 of the women, identified only by initials, ML and SB, match records of pharmacists' assistants working in London during that period. Both disappeared from public records after 1875. Yesterday, I received an unexpected delivery. A small package containing a Wedgwood teacup with the primrose pattern. Nestled inside was a handwritten invitation from Professor Westbrook. The complete circle gathers only once each decade. We convene this Friday at 8. Your presence would honor Margaret's contribution to your understanding. Wear something suitable for a formal photograph. The invitation card bears a watermark visible only when held to light, the same crossed bones symbol from the poison bottle in the original photograph. I should refuse. I should take everything I've gathered to authorities, yet I find myself contemplating attendance with a curiosity that feels increasingly like Margaret's clinical self-observation. The historian in me argues this represents unprecedented access to a hidden tradition spanning centuries. The rational part of my mind recognizes the considerable danger. Most disturbing is my growing suspicion that I haven't discovered this lineage through scholarly persistence alone. Rather, I've been carefully guided toward it through precisely arranged breadcrumbs. The photograph, the diary, the ring, each revelation feeling less like discovery and more like invitation. The bottle that began this journey remains conspicuously absent from Professor Westbrook's collection. Its emptied space waits like a question requiring my answer. Will I merely document this tradition, or am I being assessed as a potential vessel? either to be filled or emptied. The Chelsea townhouse stands in expectant silence as I approach. My decision to attend Professor Westbrook's gathering feels less like choice and more like gravitational pull, the inevitable conclusion to an orbit that began the moment I first glimpsed that poison bottle in the tea party photograph. I've taken precautions. A colleague knows my whereabouts. I've forwarded digital copies of my research to secure locations. I've even ingested small amounts of activated charcoal, an old but effective countermeasure against certain poisons. These preparations feel simultaneously prudent and absurd, like bringing an umbrella to a tsunami. The silver door knocker, shaped like a delicate feminine hand, feels cool against my skin. Before I can use it, the door opens. Professor Westbrook stands framed in golden light. Her formal evening dress of midnight blue velvet belongs to another era, as does the elaborate silver necklace cascading across her collarbones. But it's the faces behind her that freeze my breath. 7 women of varying ages arranged throughout the drawing room, each wearing some variation of Edwardian formal attire, each with that same silver ring catching the light. "You've come," Westbrook says, satisfaction warming her tone. Margaret would be pleased. The drawing room has been transformed since my last visit. The furniture has been rearranged to precisely mirror the 1908 photograph. A tea service, the exact Wedgwood primrose pattern, waits on the central table. Most striking is the sideboard, now positioned exactly where it stood in the original image. A collection of antique bottles arranged upon it. And there, in the center, stands the bottle from the photograph. The women regard me with identical expressions. Not hostility, but assessment. I recognize Catherine Laurent Weiss among them, looking oddly timeless in high-necked lace. She nods slightly in acknowledgement. "Allow me to introduce the current circle," Professor Westbrook begins, but I interrupt. "The succession," I say, the term from Margaret's diary finally making physical sense as I see these women arranged before me. Not individuals, but phases, each woman representing a continuation. Approval flickers across several faces. "The photographer arrives in 20 minutes, Westbrook says. "Before he does, we must determine your place in tonight's composition." She gestures to 2 empty chairs at the tea table. One holds a silver ring on a velvet cushion. The other remains starkly vacant. "Every circle requires balance," she continues. "For knowledge to fill one vessel, another must be emptied. This is not cruelty, but necessity. The transformation you've been documenting requires both roles." Margaret understood this. "Do you?" The women move with choreographed precision, forming a loose semicircle around me. I notice now that the tea set includes 8 cups, though only 7 women stand before me. The 8th cup, the one clearly intended for me, sits apart, already filled with amber liquid that catches the light. "We don't choose the vessel," Catherine says softly. "The knowledge does. It recognizes its proper home." Professor Westbrook lifts the bottle from the photograph, its contents catching the light like captured amber. The original preparation remains potent after all these years. The question is which role you'll fulfill in its continuation. The amber liquid swirls hypnotically as Westbrook tilts the bottle, studying its contents with the reverence of a priest before communion. The weight of history, of all those women across generations who had sat in these same positions, presses down upon the room. I feel the presence of not just the 7 women before me, but dozens more stretching back through time. "You've spent months pursuing a poisoner," Westbrook says, "but have found something far more profound, a tradition of women who refused to let vital knowledge die simply because society deemed it dangerous in female hands." She sets the bottle down and lifts a leather-bound volume from a nearby shelf. Its ancient binding crackles as she opens it, revealing handwritten formulations in multiple writing styles spanning centuries. The Romans understood that certain compounds could either heal or destroy, depending on administration. Medieval abbesses preserved these formulations when universities would admit only men. Victorian physicians took credit for discoveries made by their silent wives and sisters. At each historical bottleneck, when knowledge risked extinction, the succession ensured its preservation. Catherine moves to stand beside me. "We are not merely poisoners, Dr. Foster. We are custodians of a pharmacopoeia too powerful for those who would weaponize it or bury it. Each transition requires absolute certainty about who should carry this burden forward." My gaze falls on the empty chair, then the one holding the silver ring. "And tonight you decide which role I play." Westbrook shakes her head. "We've already decided. The photographer's role is merely to document the choice. A clock chimes somewhere in the house. 15 minutes until the photographer arrives. I notice Catherine's hand drifting toward my untouched teacup. Margaret's diary, I say suddenly. The writing changes dramatically in the final entries, not just from weakness, but because someone else was writing portions of it. Westbrook's expression shifts subtly, very observant. She didn't make a willing sacrifice. She was manipulated, her own words interspersed with forgeries to create a narrative of consent that never existed. The atmosphere in the room chills perceptibly. The succession you described could exist without murder. I continue. Knowledge transfers without death every day in universities and apprenticeships. What you've created isn't preservation. It's a closed system that values its own perpetuation above the actual sharing of knowledge. Catherine withdraws her hand from my cup. Several of the women exchange glances. And yet you came tonight, Westbrook observes, knowing the pattern, understanding the risk. Because history deserves witnesses, I reply, reaching slowly into my pocket. And because I wanted to return this to its rightful place. I withdraw not a weapon, but the photograph that fell from Margaret's diary, the original image from 1872. As I place it on the table, all eyes fix upon a detail I only recently discovered. In its background stands a young girl, perhaps 12 years old, watching the seated women with undisguised horror. Adelaide Harwick's youngest daughter, I explain, the one who disappeared from family records after supposedly dying of fever. Except parish records show she survived and fled to America. She's the one who began documenting your succession, not to preserve it, but to expose it. The doorbell rings, the photographer arriving precisely on schedule. In that moment of distraction, I must decide whether to drink what they've offered or reveal the recording device concealed beneath my collar. The silence that follows my revelation vibrates with almost physical tension. I can see calculations happening behind Professor Westbrook's eyes, reassessments, contingencies, perhaps even a hint of respect. The doorbell rings again, more insistent this time. A creative interpretation, she finally says, her voice steady despite the sudden rigidity in her posture. Adelaide's daughter had a vivid imagination and unfortunate mental instabilities. Family traits sometimes skip generations. Like the trait for recognizing poisoners, I counter, gesturing toward the photograph. Her documentation continues through her descendants. Your succession hasn't gone unobserved. Catherine moves toward the door, but Westbrook stops her with a subtle gesture. The choice remains yours, Dr. Foster. The photographer will capture whatever tableau presents itself. I look at the untouched teacup, then at the silver ring resting on its velvet cushion. Both represent different forms of imprisonment, one in death, one in complicity. You misunderstand my purpose, I tell her, rising from my chair. I'm neither vessel to be filled nor emptied. I'm the catalyst that ends this cycle. The recording device at my collar feels suddenly heavier. Not because of any physical change, but because its activation 20 minutes ago has captured every word of their admission. The small red light blinking against my skin must now be visible as I stand. Westbrook sees it immediately. Her composed facade cracks, revealing something ancient and cold beneath. Unwise, she says, the single word carrying centuries of threatened consequence. The other women move with practiced coordination, positions shifting to block exits. Only Catherine remains still, her expression unreadable. The authorities aren't coming, Westbrook says with quiet certainty. We've endured closer scrutiny than yours across centuries. I'm aware of your institutional connections, I acknowledge, which is why this transmission isn't going to the police. It's broadcasting live to 7,000 subscribers of my historical research channel, including the descendants of Adelaide's daughter, who've been documenting your activities for generations. This is my gamble. Truth interwoven with necessary fiction. The transmission is real, though my audience considerably smaller. The fear of exposure can be as effective as exposure itself. Catherine breaks from the group, moving to the sideboard. Instead of reaching for the poison bottle, she opens a hidden drawer and removes a small leather journal that appears even older than Margaret's diary. Perhaps, she says, looking directly at Westbrook, it's time for adaptation rather than elimination. She turns to me. You speak of knowledge transfer without death. Show us this alternative. The succession has preserved these formulations through darker eras than ours, but perhaps the modern world offers different methods of continuation. The doorbell rings a third time. Through the window I glimpse not the expected photographer, but several figures in modern clothing, my research colleagues arriving precisely on schedule. The choice before this circle has transformed, not whether I join through compliance or death, but whether their centuries-old knowledge moves from shadow into light. The poison bottle stands on the sideboard, no longer a threat, but a relic of methods that need not continue. The transformation of the succession wasn't an immediate revolution, but a careful negotiation spanning months. Professor Westbrook and 3 of the older members withdrew entirely, disappearing into comfortable retirements across Europe. The remaining circle, led by Catherine Laurent-Weiss, embraced a radical transparency that would have horrified their predecessors. The formulations themselves were never evil, Catherine explained as we catalogued centuries of handwritten recipes for the Royal Pharmaceutical Society's secure archives. It was the secrecy, the hoarding, that corrupted their purpose. The knowledge preserved by the succession proved extraordinary. Botanical compounds that modern pharmaceutical companies now study for analgesic properties, anticonvulsants derived from plants long dismissed as mere folk remedies, and precision delivery methods that anticipated contemporary time-release medications by centuries. Margaret wasn't entirely wrong, Catherine admitted one evening as we carefully photographed the 1872 group portrait for preservation. There was a transfer occurring, but it never required death. The succession convinced itself that knowledge this powerful demanded sacrifice, when what it truly needed was ethical stewardship. The diary of Adelaide Harwick's escaped daughter, finally recovered from a university archive in Boston, revealed the tradition's darkest inflection point. My mother's circle began as healers, she wrote, women who treated those the medical establishment abandoned. But when my grandmother died, something shifted. Power replaced purpose. They began to believe that knowledge itself demanded blood tribute. Adelaide's youngest had spent decades documenting the succession's activities across continents, creating a shadow lineage dedicated not to poisoning, but to observation. Her descendants had watched from generation to generation, waiting for the right moment or the right person to break the cycle. The original amber bottle now rests in a museum display case, its deadly contents neutralized but preserved for study. The accompanying placard makes no mention of the succession, describing it simply as an example of 19th century pharmaceutical storage containing compounds used in both healing and harm, a reminder of knowledge's dual potential. The silver rings were melted down in a private ceremony attended by both former members and the descendants of their victims. The resulting silver was used to create a memorial sculpture of open hands, releasing droplets into a reflecting pool. The Tea Party photograph remains in my office, now fully contextualized with Margaret's diary and Adelaide's daughter's documentation. Visitors often comment on the poison bottle visible in the background, seeing it as a quaint reminder of less regulated times rather than understanding its true significance as both weapon and symbol. Professor Westbrook sent only one communication after her departure, a postcard from Vienna bearing a reproduction of Gustav Klimt's Medicine with a single sentence: "Knowledge transforms, but need not destroy." The Chelsea House has been converted into a women's health research center, its drawing room now a library containing contemporary pharmaceutical texts alongside carefully preserved historical volumes. The piano remains in its original position, though now medical students occasionally play it during study breaks. What remains unresolved is whether the transformation came in time. The last page of Catherine's private notes, which she showed me in confidence, listed 5 names of women trained by Westbrook before our intervention, women who disappeared from the final gathering, taking their silver rings and perhaps certain formulations with them. Some traditions resist extinction, adapting rather than ending completely. Knowledge, like light, finds paths through even the narrowest openings. The question of whether the surviving members of the succession were truly committed to transparency troubled me as autumn turned to winter. Catherine's research facility had published preliminary findings on 3 historic compounds with promising modern applications, but I couldn't shake the feeling that certain formulations remained conspicuously absent from their disclosures. The silver locket arrived on my desk the morning of the winter solstice, the darkest day appropriately marking my most disquieting discovery. Inside was not a photograph, but a small square of parchment bearing just 5 letters written in faded purple ink. AMWBR. I recognized the handwriting immediately from Margaret's diary. That evening, I spread all my documentation across my apartment floor, creating a timeline spanning the century since the Tea Party photograph was taken. 5 initials. 5 women trained by Westbrook who never appeared at our confrontation. 5 potential vessels for knowledge that might still prefer shadow to light. The pattern emerged slowly as I traced connections between seemingly unrelated events. A neurologist in Edinburgh whose revolutionary treatment for seizure disorders appeared without traditional research documentation. A botanical researcher in Singapore who discovered a plant-based compound that mimicked death before allowing remarkable recovery. A forensic pathologist in Vancouver whose detection methods for certain toxins had advanced beyond current scientific understanding. All women, all orphaned or disconnected from family histories, all with unexplained gaps in their academic records approximately 3 years before their breakthroughs. The initials matched. Amelia Winters Blackwood Reed. I found myself staring at the original Tea Party photograph again, focusing on that poison bottle's distinctive shape. The same silhouette had been subtly incorporated into the logo of a new pharmaceutical startup, generating excitement for its innovative delivery systems, a company whose 5 principal researchers remained anonymous behind corporate structures. My phone rang, displaying Catherine's number. "You've received it then," she said without preamble. "The locket or the message?" "Both. I thought you should know. Professor Westbrook was found dead in Vienna yesterday. Natural causes, according to authorities." "Was it?" I asked. Catherine's pause stretched uncomfortably. "That depends on how you define natural. The succession always understood that knowledge requires both preservation and evolution. Some branches of the tree needed pruning for others to flourish." "And which branch are you, Catherine?" Another pause. "The bridge, perhaps, between what was and what could be." She hesitated before continuing. "The 5 women Westbrook trained separately. They've made contact. They're interested in your proposed model of ethical stewardship, but with modifications." "What kind of modifications?" "They believe certain formulations must remain controlled, if not secret. That humanity isn't ready for knowledge without safeguards." I glanced at the photograph again. Those 3 women frozen in time, one looking directly at the camera with the certainty of someone who believed completely in the rightness of her cause, despite the poison bottle deliberately positioned behind her. "When do they want to meet?" I asked. The resolution demanded both truth and choice. 5 women whose training continued the succession's methods, yet who might embrace a new path. A century-old photograph that began as evidence of murder had transformed into something more complex. A documented turning point where knowledge preservation became twisted into something darker. I agreed to the meeting at dawn on the winter solstice. The location seemed deliberately symbolic. The Botanical Gardens Medicinal Plant Conservatory, where healing and harm grew side by side beneath glass walls that transformed darkness into filtered light. They arrived together, but positioned themselves apart. 5 women whose appearances varied widely, but whose posture reflected identical training. They carried no visible poison bottles or silver rings, yet something in their collective presence made the air feel charged with potential. "You've disrupted a tradition that survived world wars, prohibition, and technological revolutions," said the eldest, a silver-haired botanist whose groundbreaking work on pain management had earned international recognition. "The question is whether your disruption improves or diminishes what we protect. That depends on whether you see yourselves as custodians or gatekeepers," I answered. "The difference matters." The youngest, barely 30 but already responsible for 3 patents on drug delivery systems, stepped forward. "We believe certain knowledge remains dangerous in unfiltered form. Not because women should control it, but because no one should wield it without proper understanding." "Yet you 5 decide what proper understanding means," I challenged. "The same justification Constance Harwick used before she poisoned her sister." "Constance's methods were flawed," interjected the pathologist from Vancouver. "But her instinct for protection wasn't wrong. Some formulations in our collective knowledge could devastate populations if weaponized." I placed the Tea Party photograph on the glass table between us. "This is what happens when protection becomes power. One sister saw herself as guardian, the other as sacrifice. Neither questioned whether the entire framework needed dismantling." The 5 exchanged glances, a silent communication born from shared training. "We propose a compromise," said the neurologist. "Complete transparency with established research institutions, but staged disclosure of the most sensitive formulations over decades, not years. Evolution, not revolution. And no more murders," I insisted. "That tradition died with Westbrook." The 5th woman finally spoke, her accent suggesting Eastern European origins. "But we must protect the knowledge itself, even from those who might misuse it." As dawn light filtered through the glass ceiling, illuminating centuries-old medicinal plants surrounding us, I recognized the turning point. The succession would transform, not end, becoming something neither Constance Harwick nor her victims could have imagined. The poison bottle from that 1908 photograph would remain a warning rather than a template. Documentation continues, I said finally. Everything you do remains observed and recorded for history's judgment. The shadows end now. They nodded their agreement as cameras throughout the conservatory quietly recorded our covenant. The photograph that had started this journey, 3 women at tea with death lurking behind them, would be the last image of its kind. The knowledge would continue, but the shadows would not. The unexpected delivery from the botanical gardens arrived this morning. A meticulously preserved plant specimen labeled only with its Latin name, Aconitum napellus. Monkshood. The card attached bore no signature, merely a question. Does documentation ensure truth? I recognized the handwriting immediately as belonging to the youngest of the 5 women from our solstice meeting. The plant's inclusion wasn't random. Monkshood had featured prominently in the marginalia of Margaret Harwick's diary, described as providing the gentlest passage when properly administered. The specimen's arrival coincided with troubling news from Catherine's research facility. 3 formulations previously catalogued for the Royal Pharmaceutical Society had been withdrawn for further verification, all compounds derived from plants with dual healing-harming properties. The official explanation cited inconsistencies in historical documentation, but my requests for clarification went unanswered. More disturbing still was what I discovered when cross-referencing the withdrawn formulations with Margaret's diary. Each compound had been administered to her in carefully increasing doses during the weeks before her death, not to kill quickly, but to build tolerance, creating within her body a living repository of chemical knowledge that Constance later claimed to inherit through close observation. This wasn't mere poisoning. Something far more intimate had occurred between the sisters, a pharmacological apprenticeship where one body became the teaching text. Margaret hadn't been a simple victim, but a reluctant living laboratory. The truth crystallized as I examined the tea party photograph under ultraviolet light. Previously invisible annotations appeared in the margins, chemical formulas written in an ink that had faded from normal view decades ago. The photograph wasn't just documentation of murderous intent, but a technical manual disguised as a family portrait. My phone chimed with a message from Catherine. The original bottle contained more than poison. Check the base. I retrieved the neutralized bottle from its museum display case, feeling its weight as history and evidence combined in my hand. The glassmaker's mark on the bottom hadn't registered as significant before, a stylized lotus flower etched into the thick base. Now, when tilted precisely under light, it revealed itself as an encoded recipe, not for death, but for transformation. The succession's darkest secret wasn't that they killed to protect knowledge. It was that they had discovered, centuries before modern medicine acknowledged it, that certain compounds could transfer themselves through living systems, carrying properties that changed both recipient and substance. The poison bottle wasn't merely a delivery system, but a transformation vessel, altering whatever it contained through contact with previous preparations. This explained why the original bottle remained so crucial to their tradition. Each compound it had ever contained left molecular traces that influenced subsequent preparations. It wasn't superstition, but a sophisticated understanding of chemical memory that modern science has only begun to comprehend. The women weren't just preserving formulations. They were preserving a living pharmacological lineage where each preparation carried the essence of all that came before it. No written record could capture this knowledge. It lived in the glass itself, passed from hand to hand across centuries. The 5 women of the succession maintain our tense détente through ritualized exchanges that feel part diplomatic summit, part scientific peer review. Our bi-monthly meetings rotate between neutral locations, university laboratories after hours, conservation archives with climate-controlled vaults. Once even the preserved drawing room of a Victorian physician's home now operated as a medical history museum. The power dynamics shift subtly with each location, as if physical space itself influences our ongoing negotiation over what knowledge deserves light and what might still require shadow. The ultraviolet revelations from the Tea Party photograph have profoundly altered my understanding of what the succession truly preserved. This wasn't merely a sisterhood protecting recipes too dangerous for careless hands. They were custodians of a living alchemical process that modern chemistry lacks vocabulary to fully describe. The bottle itself was the true grimoire, each preparation adding to an unwritten wisdom embedded in molecular memory. Catherine has grown increasingly distant as research progresses. Twice I've caught her removing specimens from the archive without documentation. When confronted, she offered plausible explanations about controlled environment testing, yet something in her carefully neutral expression resurrects echoes of Professor Westbrook's calculated assessment. The historical record continues expanding in unexpected directions. A university in Uppsala discovered diaries belonging to a Swedish lady-in-waiting who documented suspicious deaths at 16th-century European courts. Her detailed observations of symptoms match precisely the effects of compounds found in Margaret Harwick's diary. More telling still was her description of the vessel of transformation passed between worthy women across 5 countries during an era when female healers faced increasing persecution. I've begun noticing subtle markers I previously overlooked, certain botanical motifs in women's jewelry across centuries, distinctive bottle shapes appearing in background details of portraits, the lotus mark appearing on glassware from disparate historical periods, the visible evidence of an invisible network stretching back further than I had imagined possible. Yesterday I received another specimen, belladonna this time, with a different handwritten question. Can knowledge exist without its keeper? The implication disturbs me. Am I merely documenting the succession or gradually becoming absorbed into its patterns? The boundaries between observer and participant grow increasingly permeable. More troubling still is the recurring dream that has haunted my sleep since handling the original bottle. Margaret Harwick sitting across from me at a tea table, neither accusatory nor peaceful, but expectant. The vessel requires balance, she says each time, stirring her teacup with careful precision. One empties so another may fill. Each morning after this dream, I find myself checking my right hand, half expecting to discover a silver ring coiled around my finger. The succession may have abandoned its deadliest methods, but its fundamental belief persists, that certain knowledge cannot simply be recorded, but must be embodied, carried forward through chosen vessels who understand its dual nature. The poison bottle sits in my office now, officially on loan for scholarly examination. Its presence seems to alter the quality of light in the room, as if the glass itself bends perception slightly. I've caught myself speaking to it in unguarded moments, as though it carries consciousness accumulated across centuries of witnessing both healing and harm. The Tea Party photograph now hangs in a unique exhibition at the Royal Society of Medicine, its gilt frame containing not just the image, but a comprehensive timeline of its journey. Visitors pause before it, studying 3 women frozen in their Edwardian propriety, few truly comprehending the alchemical transformation their seemingly innocent gathering documented. The poison bottle remains visible in the background, though now accompanied by a detailed chemical analysis of the residue found within its amber glass. This public display represents my most significant victory in negotiations with the 5 successors. Knowledge kept entirely in shadow corrupts, while that thrust recklessly into light risks weaponization. The exhibit walks this delicate balance, revealing enough to document history, while encoding the most dangerous elements in language only those with proper training would recognize. Catherine finally explained her distance during our last meeting in the botanical archives. Seated among specimens collected across centuries, she revealed faint scarring along her wrist where a silver ring had once rested. I wasn't merely Westbrook's student, she confessed. I was intended as Margaret to her Constance, the vessel to be emptied. I switched the preparations while maintaining the appearance of compliance. The succession taught me too well about molecular substitutions. The revelation clarified much. Her determination to prevent history's repetition came not from abstract ethical concerns, but lived experience. She hadn't fully broken from tradition, but subverted it from within, a pattern repeating across generations whenever the knowledge threatened to become more valuable than its carriers. What none of us anticipated was how the Tea Party photograph would transform in public consciousness. It has become something of an internet phenomenon, appearing in academic papers on women's medical history alongside true crime forums. Most viewers see only the surface, well-dressed Edwardian women at tea, while others detect something unsettling they cannot quite articulate. A select few recognize the bottle for what it truly represents, not just poison, but transformative possibility. The youngest of the 5 successors now teaches pharmaceutical history at London University, incorporating the succession story into her curriculum as cautionary context rather than instruction manual. The botanist has established a secure digital repository for the complete formulations, accessible only through a carefully designed system requiring multiple authorizations. The others maintain their respective research positions, their work now subject to ethical oversight previously absent from the tradition. Margaret Harwick's diary has been published in a scholarly edition with extensive annotations, presenting her not merely as victim, but as complex participant in a tradition she both resisted and embodied, her voice now properly contextualized among those who previously commanded the narrative. As for the original bottle, its physical form remains secured in museum archives, but its essence has transformed, from murder weapon to historical evidence to educational tool. Like the knowledge it contained, it serves multiple purposes depending on who encounters it and with what intention they approach its ambiguous potential. The photograph that began as documentation of murder has become something more profound, a portal through which we examine not just the succession, but our complicated relationship with knowledge itself, and the eternal question of who decides which truths remain in shadow and which emerge into light. The most unexpected consequence of the succession's transformation has been the quiet emergence of its counterpart legacy. While cataloging materials from Adelaide Harwick's daughter, the child in the 1872 photograph who fled to America, I discovered correspondence between her descendants that revealed a parallel tradition of documentation and observation spanning generations. These were not mere historians, but specially trained witnesses who developed methodologies for tracking the succession's activities across continents and centuries. They called themselves the attestation, and their techniques evolved alongside those they monitored. Where the succession preserved chemical transformations, the attestation perfected methods of observation without intervention, developing specialized photography techniques, preservation methods for evidence, and coded communication systems that allowed them to maintain vigilance across generations without detection. Most remarkable was their foundational principle: we witness but do not judge, we document but do not alter. Their discipline in maintaining this neutrality even when witnessing acts they found abhorrent reveals an extraordinary commitment to historical truth over immediate justice. The elderly woman who reached out to me from Boston last month, identifying herself only as the current observer, shared family records dating back to 1873, when Adelaide's daughter established the first documentation protocols. The similarities between their archival methods and my own research approach cannot be coincidental. I now wonder if my entire academic career, my instinctive draw toward forgotten histories and overlooked evidence, might have been shaped by influences I never recognized. "We've watched you since your undergraduate thesis on overlooked women in medical history," she told me during our video call. Her New England accent softened with age. "Your methodology mirrored ours so precisely that several of us suspected deliberate training, though we could identify no direct connection. This revelation forces me to reconsider my role in this unfolding story. Was I truly an independent researcher who stumbled upon the Tea Party photograph through scholarly persistence? Or was I subtly guided toward it by unseen curators who recognized in me something useful for their continuing mission?" The tea service that arrived yesterday, a complete Wedgwood primrose pattern identical to that in the photograph, came with a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "The cycle nears completion. Will you continue as witness or become participant? Tomorrow marks the anniversary of the original Tea Party photograph. All 5 successors have requested a meeting at the Chelsea House, now restored to its Edwardian appearance for the exhibition's final day. They wish to recreate the image, not as reenactment but as evolution, positioning themselves where the Harwick sisters once sat, the neutralized poison bottle in its original position on the sideboard. They've asked me to take the photograph myself, completing a circle begun over a century ago. The choice seems simple yet contains profound implications. Will I document their transformation as external observer, maintaining the attestation's tradition of witnessing without intervention? Or has my immersion in both legacies fundamentally altered me, creating something neither tradition anticipated, a hybrid role that both preserves and transforms? The original camera from 1908 has been located and restored to working condition. It waits in my office alongside the modern digital equipment I typically use, 2 methods of seeing, separated by technology but united in purpose. I stand before the sideboard in the drawing room, a space now suspended between past and present, between documentation and participation. The Edwardian furniture gleams with fresh polish, Late afternoon light slants through tall windows, creating the same sepia-toned atmosphere captured in the original photograph. 5 women sit arranged around the tea table, their posture deliberately echoing the Harwick sisters, yet distinctly modern in their subtle adaptations. The primrose teacups wait before them, steam rising in delicate spirals. On the sideboard behind them, the original bottle stands empty of its deadly contents but full of its historical significance. I adjust the vintage camera, feeling the weight of both apparatus and history in my hands. Through its viewfinder, the scene transforms, becoming at once contemporary and timeless, a visual record of knowledge's evolution rather than its corruption. "The light remembers," Catherine murmurs, her silver ring now transformed into a pendant around her neck. Every image carries molecular memory of what came before. As I prepare to capture this moment, I notice something unexpected in the frame, a reflection in the polished surface of the piano. Not of myself as photographer, but of a woman in Edwardian dress standing where I stand. Margaret Harwick looks back at me through impossible physics, through the bend of light across time, her expression neither accusatory nor peaceful but knowing. I blink, and the reflection vanishes, yet the sensation of witnessed continuity remains. The succession and attestation have always existed in symbiotic balance, one preserving transformative knowledge, the other ensuring that preservation doesn't become corruption. Neither complete without the other, neither pure in isolation. I take the photograph. The shutter's click echoes with finality, capturing not merely 5 women at tea, but the culmination of centuries of female knowledge preserved against impossible odds. The flash illuminates the bottle on the sideboard, its glass catching and refracting light in patterns that seem to encode messages visible only to those who understand its language. The image develops slowly in the chemical bath, molecules transforming, silver particles arranging themselves into permanent record. As it emerges from darkness into visibility, I recognize that I have created not merely documentation, but continuation. Not endpoint, but evolution. When complete, the photograph shows more than I witnessed through the viewfinder. In the shadows behind the 5 women sits a 6th figure, translucent yet unmistakable. Margaret Harwick has returned to the composition not as victim but as witness, her presence acknowledging the transformation of what began with her sacrifice. This photograph will join the first in museums and archives, bookending a century of women's hidden knowledge finally emerging into light. Not all secrets deserve darkness. Not all revelations bring comfort. This image, like the poison bottle itself, remains fundamentally ambiguous, its meaning determined by who views it and what they bring to the encounter. As I place both photographs side by side in the exhibition's final display, I understand that documentation itself is transformation. The act of witnessing changes both observer and observed. The succession continues, as does the attestation, each evolving beyond their origins towards something neither tradition anticipated. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames.